I'm happy. Happy's
Uh-huh.
it's a funny word. You're never happy for a long time.
Yeah, it's momentary.
It's like happy moments.
Mhm.
Now, I'm running through my mind, through my like things that make me happy and things that are happening to me right now. Yes, I mean, I can't complain. It's it's a fun ride.
Guillermo, thanks so much, man, for coming on. I really appreciate it. Coming in now that you're in town, I had to take advantage of having you here and being the first in the new podcast studio. So thanks so much, man.
Amazing. The studio looks great. Thanks for having me.
No, of course, man. It's having a conversation like this with you. I've wanted to do for a very long time, and it's really like I know what you have done for a living. That's how we formed our relationship, right? As coworkers first at an ad agency at Dieste, and then at Lerma. But you've had a really long career, and if I read your bio, one of the things in there is you call yourself a retail savant. What the hell's a retail savant?
That's somebody that I've been doing shopping for a long, long time.
Yeah.
No, basically it's you get to know the details and the strategies of how to sell products in different stages, different setups, malls, stores, pop-up stores, websites,
Right.
and so on. And that came really handy when I have to work with clients like the Dallas Market Center or Levi's or Nike and create campaigns and projects for them.
Right. So, okay. What I want to do is I really want to start from the very beginning because you know
Okay.
what? We've known each other for well over a decade.
Mhm.
I don't know a thing about your family. So, or how you grew up or what, it was like when you were a kid. So let's start off with, tell me exactly where you grew up.
Let's go there. So I'm originally from Argentina. I was born in Buenos Aires. When I was about 3 years old, we moved to the suburbs to a little town called La Drogué,
Mhm.
which is very pretty, tons of trees. Is this used to be like a summer vacation destination for poets and artists in, in the last century. And, Jorge Luis Borges was used to go there for vacation.
Okay.
And, I got great memories from living there.
So tell me, where are your parents from? Were they originally
My
from?
parents are from Argentina, both of them. They still live there. My dad used to be a judge from the Supreme Court in Argentina.
Okay.
Very powerful, smart guy. Admire him a lot. Of course, we clashed a lot when I was, into skateboarding and graffiti and being an artist. It was the opposite. We're named the same. He's also Guillermo. But I learned a lot from him. He had this very good sense of humor,
Mhm.
very ironic. He also has a big ego, so it was, hard to deal with because I was very independent. I was, uh, completely opposite.
Right.
I'm the first child, the first of five. It's me, and I have a twin brothers, and I have a sister, and I have another brother, so we're five. So I always have this pressure of being the first kid.
That is a lot of pressure.
It is a lot of pressure, especially when you got, your dad is very, demanding and successful and also a pain. He's a pain. But, I love him and
Yeah.
it's, I learn a lot from him. He's a very elegant guy. I remember,
Really.
He got a driver and, you used to take me to school or whatever, and he was wearing white gloves to read the newspaper because he didn't want to get his fingers dirty with the ink of the newspaper.
Yeah.
That type of thing.
Got it.
Yeah.
How about your mom?
My mom is she got me when he was very young. She was 19, uh, and she's a free spirit. She's very aesthetic, very
Hmm.
beautiful woman. She was also into painting, uh, flowers, and she was the one that took me to museums. And I remember going when I was 10 or 11 to see my first Dali art show. That really blew my mind. And, there was a very interesting combination of somebody that was very square, very,
Right.
um, you know, everything has to be this way. Uh, and she was like a flower.
Wow, that's awesome. So it's interesting. I didn't know you had that many siblings. What did your house sound like? Was there a lot of kids screaming? Was it a lot of laughter? Was it a lot of music? Like, describe what it. If I were to walk into your house when you were 12 years old, what did it sound like?
It was a lot of fun. So we have different. So my brothers are really close to me, like the twins. You know, uh, we were like a year and a half apart, and then my sister came later, and then my little brother came like 15 years later. So they were like different stages when we were kids. I have a lot of friends from different groups of, different walks of life. I got the friends from the the sons of the friends of my dad.
Uh huh.
That type of very uh, traditional people, and then I have my skateboard friends, and then I have my, you know, uh, friends that were musicians, and I was very curious, and I was trying to be me, and also being what I was supposed to be as a kid. But we have a lot of fun. I mean, there were no cell phones,
Oh
there
yeah.
were no cameras. Uh, Summers were amazing. We were like riding our bikes, leaving in the morning uh, to the tennis club and coming, late at night. You will ride your bike from house to house, knocking on the door to see where your friends were, and just, you know, so and so is at somebody's place, so we'll go there, and then you go somewhere else, and I don't know. It was a great time. So, yeah, summers were great. Riding bikes, playing with friends, and it was that time when you go to uh, you know this the club on summer, and the group was from kids from like 18 to 7, and it
Right.
was great. It was like the Goonies, that type of
Oh,
thing.
that's great.
Yeah, it was
That's
fun.
awesome,
It was a lot of fun.
man. It must have been great growing up there. And actually, okay, think back when you think back to that time period in your
Yes.
life, right? Describe to me one of your favorite memories of that time. When are and it could be just a regular Saturday. What was a regular Saturday with your family? You know?
um I think my favorite memory from that time was when we went to, uh, a friend of my dad had this ranch. We used to go to the ranch on summers or Easter time, for vacation, and riding horses, herding the cows with the gauchos, and learning how to play polo, uh, hunting, you know, rabbits and stuff. Like, you could drive a car and you were like 10 or 12, and, you know, I crashed one of those. But yeah, I mean, you were doing like kid stuff
Yeah.
in a really free spirit way. I mean, this was the 80s, so,
Okay.
it was fun.
So, I mean, you know, your whole professional life and your personal life, if I were to describe it in a way, it's like always surrounded by some sort of an artistic expression. There's some art around it.
Yes.
You know, an outfit is never just a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. It's like, and then, all the art that you produce as well and consume. So that your mom is the one who introduced you to that.
Yes, my mom was there artistic in the family. Um, but, I got early memories of going to, the I was never into sports until I discovered skateboarding and surfing and stuff. But they will send me to like tennis classes because it was the thing to do. And I remember drawing with the racket on on the floor. Drawing was my thing, and reading. I used to read a lot
Okay.
when I was a kid. Um, and then the thing when they drop you at the club or at the um, and then I was not into soccer, so they were playing the soccer, and I would just walk around town watching windows. I was window shopping.
Okay.
Uh, so I was imagining clothes and you know looking at colors and shapes and you know I was a bit like a lonely kid also. So
Okay.
it was um, it's um, so I always been into clothing and pretty things and decoration, arranging the furniture in your room. And uh, the other thing is I because we were a lot of kids, and you know I never really got the toys that I wanted or the clothes that I wanted, also being the first.
Right.
So it's y- yeah, I was making things. So I will get a pair of jeans and paint something on them or make t-shirts or you know being trying to be creative with whatever I have. um yeah, and then came art. And I remember that I asked my parents to take me to drawing classes because I
Hmm.
like there was and
How
they
old were you then?
I think it was 10,
Okay.
9, somewhere there.
Hmm.
Because I have a close friend that uh his parents took him to drawing classes. He used to draw amazing. And I wanted uh to learn how to draw. And they didn't want to take me to those classes. I don't know, because they couldn't afford it or they prefer for me to play rugby. I don't know. But now I really appreciate it because I think I have an original line,
Okay.
like my way of expressing is very pure and authentic. Uh, and I think if I have taken those classes, I would be, you know, skewed to some different type of style.
Perhaps.
Uh,
Perhaps. Right.
but we never know.
Yeah. So because tell your parents I want to take drawing classes, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but if I imagine your dad, like you
Yeah.
said, and Supreme Court judge, clearly focused on the law, very logical, very sort of um, segmented in concrete. Uh, Did at what point did that really, maybe your creative pursuits, or when he saw you had more passion for creativity, did that cause a lot of friction between you guys, or?
It did. Not for the career, but for the expression. Um, I remember once uh, I was dating this girl. I think it was in my 20s, and uh, this girl that is my wife right now. Uh, and it was a Saturday, and my dad lent me the car, and I was going out, and I was wearing these um, orange jeans. Uh, and he told me, "Go change your pants, or I'm not giving the keys of the car." And I said, "Fuck it." So we took the train. My wife always
Right,
remembers
right,
that because she's like, just change your pants. Uh,
right.
but no, that's where I was supposed to be, and I didn't care. And I think, over time, my dad started to respect me or respect what I do. He always respect me, but
Hmm.
respect what my professional choice when I started to become more famous than he was.
Ah, gotcha, gotcha.
When his friends saw me in the newspapers or in an interview or, oh, your kid is, I saw this video clip or this commercial, this campaign that Guillermo did and blah, blah, blah. So he feel proud about it. Remember, this is small, you know, people care a lot about what other people say.
Right, right.
So, they come from that mentality.
Latin America, of course,
Yeah.
everybody has to know
Yeah.
everything, and everyone has an opinion on what everybody
Yeah.
else's life is. Oh man, that's interesting. You know, I I want to touch upon so you never actually took any formal training in art, even for at university level?
No, I study mass communication
Okay.
in Argentina. 5 year career. In that time was, you did like uh, communication, and then you could choose to be a journalist or an advertising guy. There wasn't those careers that were really into craft. Uh, so my life back then was I work in a law firm in the morning. uh, I took a training or an internship on an agency, and then I went to university at night.
Okay.
Uh, and then I would do homework on the train back home um, until I got like a full time job at an agency, and then I could quit uh, my day job. Uh, and then I got a scholarship to come to study to the U.S. I went to LSU and I did some design and color theory classes. I took theater, I did marketing, and then came back to Argentina, started to work in this agency that was very hot back then in the 90s called Aguja Machete, very famous in Latin America. And that was my break into, advertising big league back then, doing commercials. And it was a great time in Argentina. We filmed with Beam Vendors and
Hmm.
we were doing amazing commercials. We did campaigns with MTV. We won, uh, Can Lions and big parties. And, it was a really great time working for the best agency back then. And I've been always been a big fan of Oliviero Toscani and the Benetton campaigns
Hmm.
and the Colors magazine. I was, going through magazines. Magazines was your feed on magazines and books. I remember
Right.
spending my whole salary on books. Uh, and it's funny. We were in Buenos Aires like a month ago for Christmas with the kids, and we were going through the apartment, and this big, you know, bookshelf full of books and magazines. I have the whole collection of Ness and ID and The Face and Interview details, all those magazines, the advertising annuals. And one of my kids go, "Why so many magazines?" And I tell, there was no internet,
Right. Right.
so that was the way you discover the
The
world,
world, what's going on in the world?
right?
Exactly. You're
What's
right.
happening in London? What's happening in Tokyo? What's happening in New York? Uh,
And
so you
there
would
wasn't like
feed on that.
fashion, and there wasn't like fashion TV or design TV channels
There was
or nothing.
nothing.
Yeah, magazine print was
MTV, start,
a little bit. Yeah.
yeah, a little bit, but it was first in the US and it came later to Latin America. So if you didn't travel and you weren't curious, you couldn't get access to that. And that was actually really cool compared to what happens today because, okay, you didn't have access to everything, but you have access to your particular regional war or whatever was happening.
Hmm.
Uh, so there was a specific uh, taste, specific imprint, uh, and then it became globalization, and then the internet, and then the social media, and now everybody's trapping their own. I mean, algorithm, which is everybody's algorithm. You see, kids today. You get everything, the same thing in your feed. If you're into art or
Hmm.
music or you follow the same designers, you are trapped into the same algorithm unless you are curious enough.
You force yourself
You
out.
force yourself out. You force yourself out. I was teaching this class at Miami Art School last quarter, and I was talking about all these references and these galleries and artists in LA, and one of these kids, say, "Hey, can I ask you something?" And I live in LA, and how come you know more about LA than I do?
Hmm.
And I was like, because I'm curious.
Right.
Because when I travel, I walk, I get into shops that I wouldn't normally go. And, I read magazines that, they're not my interest, but, it could be fun to dig into this. I go to the airport and I grab 7 magazines, finance, art, music,
Right.
cowboys, I don't know, sports, random stuff. Because because of our work, you need to know a little bit of everything. Um, you know, I'm not really into soccer, and I'm from Argentina, but I know a lot of soccer.
Yeah, you're the weirdest Argentinian I've ever met.
Exactly.
You really are.
But I make really good asados. I killer,
For
I
sure, for
do
sure.
killer barbecues. But yeah, I mean, you have to know about stuff, and
So
you have to be
yeah,
open minded.
so that brings me to an interesting point because in my mind, and I know this has been a topic of discussion, certainly from during my career in the advertising industry, it was certainly always present. But do you think that having grown up in Buenos Aires, which is
Yes.
known as like this sort of hub of creativity, maybe because of there was a military dictatorship for quite a while. Some say that after that left, there was like this flourishing of creativity. Is that what you experienced? Do you think that fed into you a
I
lot?
did. I mean, that happened when I was still a kid, like in the
Hmm.
70s. I was still a kid. Then everything exploded in the 80s. So I got the last, you know, part of the 80s when I was a teen. And then when I was, starting to go out and go clubbing and, you know, uh, did my first fashion show and go to, get into skateboarding and festivals and that. It was a great time. It was, uh, Soda Stereo,
Hmm.
Babasónicos, uh, Fito Páez, all those musicians, and the first, um, you know, lot of galleries, new artists, new fashion designers that I got to wear, and then I got to know, and then I got to work with.
Right,
So
right.
it was pretty amazing. Um, yeah, that was a great time. I remember I was walking into this. There's a it's not really a mall. It's uh, like a galleria, phantom shops, underground shops called Bond Street, where all the skate shops and all the alternative, uh, punk and military gear, and
Okay.
you go there to get like stuff that you can get at the mall. Um, so it was a like a hub for, people will go there and, uh, you'll buy imported things like, the tracks for like dependent tracks for your skateboard or wheels or like a cool T-shirt or Nikes. Nike was not in in Argentina, so you have to go and dig for somebody that will bring Nikes from the U.S. or Europe and go buy them and pay them like three times the price. You know, you have to hunt for cool stuff that it was cool, but you couldn't get. Um, so you hang out there and you see people. Oh, that's so and so, and you know. Uh, and then I remember I was approached by this drag queen. That it was like, I don't know how. It's a promoter from a club called El Dorado. Very underground, super cool. Uh, and he said, "I like how you dress. You do design. And we're doing these, um, fashion shows on Thursdays. Would you like to do a show?" I'm like, "Sure." Um, so I remember I designed a collection,
Um,
and my parents went to Europe for like a couple of weeks, and I make it fit,
uh-huh.
when they were away, so I could design the whole thing with my girlfriend from the time,
Hmm.
and then I organized the whole show, and it was amazing.
It went well.
Well, I mean, it was so much fun.
Yeah.
Putting your first fashion show in a nightclub on a Wednesday,
That,
and it was
that sounds
clandestine,
badass. Yeah. But for your
and
first one, that's
well, and you get to choose the music and design the thing, and it was great.
no, that sounds
Um,
amazing.
it was really fun. Uh, yeah, so you could do those things, and there were no I have no registered of that. I took some pictures, but I have no video because the guy that was videotaping it would be a VHS camera, this size, couldn't track him down. So I mean that's lost. But you know, I have all those memories, or going to see this electronic band on a Tuesday night. It was like because my friend of mine was playing, and it was like maybe 15 people. It was empty. But Gustavo Cerati was there.
Oh. Amazing. Yeah.
So
Legend.
right, so you have a beer with Gustavo, and you see your friends playing, and your friends suck because they were just like, but the whole thing was magic, you know.
It sounds like a crazy just inspiring time for sure that, set you up for the rest of what you did.
It was super inspiring, and you can get away with pretty much everything.
Oh, that's great. You've used the word fun quite a bit,
Yeah.
and I'd like to ask you, like, I have a very clear picture in my mind of Dragan art and what it feels like. I would, and not to kind of box anybody in, but if I were to describe it to someone, I would say it. Everything I've ever seen you do is optimistic, whimsical, and happy. Is Are you creating because that's how you feel, or perhaps are you creating that look and feel to make yourself feel that way? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Could be both ways. I don't know. It's just what's come out.
It,
You know, uh, I love color. I love pretty things. I like beauty things. Um, and that's what I draw. And not only on the drawings, but yeah, it's I like to send a message of love and integration and diversity. I mean, I was you know thinking about that before diversity became a thing.
right.
I put a drag queen on a campaign for Levi's on '93.
Wow.
You know,
Yeah.
and I didn't thought about that being uh, a move. I thought he was the right person for the cast.
Right. Right.
So it's um, I don't know, and I think I've been influenced also by all the Benetton campaigns and the colorful, um, how colorful that was and that spirit and the bands at the time. And I don't know, I think it's part of my upbringing of also being exposed to different things, polo players, uh, traditional people, skateboarders,
Yeah.
musicians, people with money, people with no money. Uh, I don't know. Um, I think that's the way it is. I mean, that's the way I am, and that's the way I express. I'm very honest in my work. No matter if it's a music video or a photo or a commercial work, which is always a little bit different because you have to, stay on the lines of the client. Even you push it, you still, have to respect the brand and the brand voice of whoever you're working for. But it's, I think it's part of the language, and over time, you develop a language. Uh, for me, it was, it's still a process. Um, it's funny. Somebody yesterday, a friend was asking me, "Well, you never draw Rottweilers or snakes," and I'm like, I could do it, but it's drawing a heart. Even if it's a cross eyes and it's dead, it's part of the thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's giraffes and fantastic animals and imaginary things that could be also imaginary friends. You know,
Mm.
I call the like happy creatures.
Okay.
So there's something there: happy, fun, beauty, colors. Uh, yeah,
Yeah, you born and grew up in Buenos Aires in Argentina, but having known you for this long, I kind of don't think of you of being from there. Because you've lived in so many different parts of the world, you've traveled so much both professionally and living there. What what place has inspired you the most that you've actually worked in or that you've lived in for a period of time? And why is it Dallas, Texas?
many places. uh, I think Tokyo is a really like a very inspiring place. Um, I feel at home. Uh, Italy is also, you know, very close to my heart because I have Italian heritage, but also from my time working at Benetton and also working with some Italian brands right now. My kids now study in Italy. Um, I love Italian food. I love how they dress. I love their lifestyle. Uh, yeah, Venice is an amazing city, especially at night. It's
Hmm.
just so
It's gorgeous.
magical. Uh, New York was very inspiring in the 90s. I wouldn't think New York is particularly inspiring now. But every place I go, I mean, Dallas is also amazing. If you embrace what Dallas have to give you, the
Yeah.
cowboy, the 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 food. There are really good museums here. Um, I wouldn't say the highways, but I think
Yeah.
uh, North Park, for example, for me is one of the best malls in the world.
Yeah,
The
it is
way it's
great.
designed, the way it's all the art hanging on the walls, uh,
Priceless pieces of art there that
priceless
a
pieces.
lot of people don't
People
realize
just
they're
walk
yeah, and
by
they don't
and
realize
they
what they're
don't
looking at.
realize there's Warhols and
Yeah.
all this amazing art um, hanging on the walls. I mean, you can find inspiration anywhere. Uh,
Okay.
and for me, traveling is very inspiring. Not not the travel, you say okay, traveling. It sounds, uh, it's not, but moving. You know, even if I'm get stuck when I'm on a project, I go for a walk or I ride a bike or, you know, I this is I think back when I was going to university and doing my homework in the train. Like train really inspires me. When you're on a public transportation, uh, I said trains because you can't do that when you drive, but uh, you know, trains are amazing. Uh, Planes used to be amazing. Now I just sleep on the plane. It's so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But trains are amazing place to come up with ideas and ride, and you see the windows passing by and
Yeah. You kind of watch the world go by and
watch war. You know, people watching is I think my favorite sport.
yeah, it's that I can go to any coffee shop, cafe and be there for hours just sipping on
That's
coffee and
that's one of my favorite things to do.
absolutely, no doubt. Okay, so talking a little bit about well the work and then more professionally, you've worked for so many brands. I mean, it'd be ridiculous to list them off, and you've worked in, in Europe as well. What is one of the projects that you are most proud of?
Many of them, to be honest, it's hard to pick one, um, but I could pick three.
You can pick three.
Okay. So I think being able to work at Colors and being the editors
Hmm.
of Colors magazine was for me like an epic moment. It was something that I saw for so far away. It's a magazine that was you were getting.
Hmm.
It was making the, you know, in
It was
12 languages.
and just such a rock star sort of
Well, it was the internet before the internet.
yeah.
It was this magazine that was digging about the world. There was no celebrities, no news. It was just about ideas. And one day I was editor. I just couldn't believe it. I cried. I remember,
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm doing this. And the whole process of getting that job was, it was nuts because, I saw an ad for people, asking for under 25 artists to go to send their portfolio, send my portfolio. They called me in for a 2 week trial. Then they called me again for a 3 month trial. Then I stayed for 2 years. And at the end of the first year, you're off. Or you did, but you could present a project and stay a little bit longer. And I remember I presented a project to Oliviero, which was a series of pictures. It was the end of the millennial. It was 2000, and I presented this story for Rai, which is you know the
Yeah.
main TV channel in Italy, and it was a story about people that were 99 years old. So I photograph and interview all these people, um, and they Rai pick it up and they put it on air. And I went to Libero and said, I want to do a book about these people. And he hated the project. He said, pictures are off. Just like that because they're old,
Yeah.
you know. Uh, and I feel so bummed. But then he said, but I want you to be the editor of Colors magazine.
I
And it
hate the
was
project, but I want you to do this.
exactly.
Oh, shit.
And he said, I don't think you're capable of, but I'm gonna give it to you. And it was the best, worst interview of my life. I feel like this guy, man, he's giving
Yeah,
me my dream job. Uh, and of course he thinks I'm capable, but he's telling me I'm not capable. So it's like a whole, but
man.
that was the way he was. And that's the way, you get pushed and inspired at the same time.
Okay.
And I was 26. And I was running this magazine
Hmm.
that was published in 12 languages.
It's amazing. 26. Wow.
Yes. And I have a team of 30 people. And, we were stringing in Paris, people in London, people in New York. We were getting images from all the best, from Magnum and from all the best photographers. I did my first cover with Patrick de Machelier. I mean, it was nuts.
That
It was
sounds amazing.
nuts.
But 26, that's
And I was calling the shots. What's this story goes, this story doesn't go. I mean, to have that amount of freedom
yeah.
and that amount of power and trust when you're so young, uh, it's precious.
It's a ton of pressure too.
It's a lot of pressure. I didn't sleep. Um, and I remember this was also one of Olivero things. There was an editor leaving and I was coming in. We were working together for like the first month. So, that back then you have all the magazine, put it on the wall, all the dummy. And of course it was his last issue, so he wanted to imprint his ideas. It
Sure.
was my first issue, so I wanted my ideas. So, and we have a weekly meeting with Oliviero to present ideas. So I'll put my ideas, I'll go to the bathroom, and he will put his ideas on the wall. So it was like that every morning until, one day we found each other on the 6 a.m. bus on the way, and I was like, dude, let's cut it off. And then he left, and it was my magazine. But yeah, it was fun. And then another project um, that I I think he was very interesting was a project that um uh, I did for Coca-Cola. I mean, I worked for them many years, uh, and this project was uh, it was a brief that came. At that time, I was based here in Dallas, but we still had an office in Argentina, and we also uh, were opening an office in Mexico with Lerma. And Coke invited 50 agencies to, from around the world to participate in the project. But they sent the brief um, on the mail.
Hmm.
So I got to the office in Argentina and I was checking my mail. I was like, what is this? So I opened it and it was a bottle of Coke and it was like a message in the bottle and was a whole brief to participate in the 100-year anniversary of the Coca-Cola Contour bottle for a book and a show. And the deadline was that day.
What do you mean that? Oh, because you just hadn't checked the
Because
mail.
I got checked to the office and checked the mail. And, my assistant back then didn't let me know. And I was like, so I reach out to the client and say, hey, this just happened. Can you give me like an extra couple of days? And they say, yeah, of course. And I opened the brief to all three offices. Um, and for some reason, nobody really could like nail that brief. And I was super under pressure. And last minute, the night before, I came up with an idea, just drew it myself, sent it to the client. They love it. And never heard back from them. 3 months later was the opening of the the show
Hmm.
and at the High Museum in Atlanta, and I was invited, and I go. And then when I was walking to the museum, I saw that poster was the main image
Ah,
of the whole project.
man, that's nuts.
And again, I cry, you know, because it's that thing when you know,
You can't believe you're actually there
yeah. I
in
mean,
that
I
moment.
I remember when I did my first whatever. It was a sketch for a juice in an agency when I was internship, and then my internship was finished. So and then 2 years later, my mom sent me to buy juice, and I got the juice, and it was that thing that I sketch. So it's crazy how when you see your work in the world,
Right, right.
and it never stops to amaze me how those things happen.
Absolutely. Uh, uh, Maybe it happened at 26, when you became an editor, or maybe it was that particular project you just said. But do you feel that you've felt proud of yourself? Have you questioned, am I really actually good, or should, should I, do I belong to these circles of influence that you've participated in? Or was that something you perhaps struggled with?
No, I don't struggle. At this point in my career and life, I don't have a pressure of the white paper, the white blank page, whatever
Hmm.
they're called. Um, I mean, of course, I feel the pressure of the liver and the timing,
Sure.
but I know that I'm gonna come out with something.
You've got
Uh,
that level of faith in your ability to
yes,
creativity.
yes, and I also. It's not that I lower my standards,
Hmm.
but the opposite. But I know is is not that important,
Okay.
so that takes the pressure away.
Yeah. I mean, if you're doing brand work or advertising,
What is the worst thing that can happen?
uh, yeah,
Exactly,
we're
nothing.
not saving lives. Yeah.
So I mean, um, it's we have a great job, and if you like it, if you love it, it's not a job.
Yeah. Absolutely. It can definitely be fun and inspiring. And I think, I studied business, and only until, well, I can't imagine any other way of, living in a sort of business world where I would get to interact with people that are extremely creative, whether they're visually, or writers or photographers or cinematographers, like what other sort of businessy job could I have where I, you know, get to experience and meet so many of those
Yeah,
folks, And so, yeah, it is definitely a lot of pressure too. Yeah. I mean, you're working and you're doing work for clients, and sure, there's pressure in that, but
but you're not doing work for clients. You're doing work with clients.
there you go.
It's all about collaboration. I always tell my team or the people that I'm working with. Your client could be your sister, it could be your friend. And people, especially today, people move from roles to side. One day you're the client, one day you're the agency, or then you have a startup, or then you're doing something else. It's about people and empathy and being surrounded by people that are more talented than you
Hmm.
and learning and listen. Um, I mean, I found so much joy in doing this. And the third project that I was going to tell you about uh, is this collection of scarves that I'm doing with a uh, with a brand in Italy, and the whole thing happened very organically. I was uh, on vacation. I met a friend, and this friend introduced me to this guy that have a textile factory and also have like a little brand of scarves,
Hmm.
cashmere, silk, and so you know we like each other. We thought, okay, let's do a collaboration, and then start doing this uh, collections of scarves and things for them. And in the process, I started to learn a lot about textiles. And I went to Como to see how they make the fabrics and how they print. And, you know, then I go to Italy for Fashion Week and talk to the buyers. And, they come the Japanese buyers and the German buyers. They all have different things to say. And you became very vulnerable because, you're trying something new, but at the same time you're learning, and at the same time you respect, and then you know another client see it, and Pepsi saw it, and then they hired me to do a project for them, and then a flip flop company from Mexico liked the the print, and now I'm doing something for them, and it's like you never know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you never know how things will connect, and at the end of the day, it's all about people. It's about how, who you collaborate, who you help, who help you. You know, it's a long run. This is not it's not a one shot. It's a marathon, and you have to be kind to people. You have to open yourself to learn, and you fail. I mean, failure
Hmm.
is a big part of this.
Yeah. You present 10 ideas. One gets, one works.
I mean, sometimes none of them work,
Yeah.
and sometimes all of them work, and it's it's part of the it's part of the process. This they say learn to to like the process, or but it's true. The process is really it.
Yeah.
It's never like a final thing.
There is
What
no destination necessarily.
well, and you never know where. And I did a cover for Rolling Stone with Shakira once.
Hmm.
And 5 years later, I went to Mexico, and they were selling that picture in the street in a
Yeah.
tianguis,
In the flea market.
and then you're like, who should I call? Because,
Yeah. Yeah. Rights.
rights, and it's like, it's pop culture now.
Yeah. There. Oh, see, that. What more could you want?
Yeah.
So, okay, of all the titles you've had, a brand designer, business owner, entrepreneur, or like you said, retail savant. What is the word that what do you feel like? Who are you? An advertiser, a marketer? What do you feel like most?
I feel like a guy that is have a very interesting point of view about things. I like craft, and I create things. I like to be creative into different fields. I'm kind of like media agnostic, if that's a term. But one day I could be doing a book, the next day I could be doing a digital campaign, next day I could be designing a pair of shoes or building a house, uh, or doing a campaign for a politician,
Yeah.
which I've done. And I can't disclaim names. But
Did they win?
they win.
They won. Okay.
Yeah, some win, some lost. You have to get paid first in advance
Oh man.
with politicians.
Hey man. So okay, kind of a shift. So I do have to ask you because uh, not to make this like a business conversation, but like, what do you think of the whole AI and its influence on the creativity world? That I've asked a number of people that because artists or creatives or we keep hearing at some point this sort of career path or this sort of calling is going to be taken away by AI. That AI can do it better and faster. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, we've been using AI without knowing for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
AI has been part of our lives for quite a long time now. Uh, but in the way it's presented now as a tool for creativity and daily task and, you know, life, whatever you want to do with AI, it's a tool like any other tool, and I think it's great. Um, you know, it's gonna take some jobs, absolutely, but there's always gonna be a need for editing and curating and a point of view of how that should be applied. Uh, I have, you know, different examples of how that worked successfully and how that didn't. Uh, going back to teaching, I give this Nike assignment for uh, a group of students, and they all came up with, you know, the same mock-ups made out in AI. And I didn't even take the time to retouch the Nike logo. It says Nico or Ike or Mikey. And I was like, dude,
Hmm.
just at least edit, Photoshop the logo. The so and it's evolving really fast on what you can do and what it can give back to you. Um, I've been working with a client that is an AI company called Laetro, and I did a rebranding for them, and I'm also helping them curating a series of artists. So they their product is divided in two. They have like a part that is work as a quote unquote agency uh, for clients or other agencies providing solutions for briefs using AI, and on the other side uh, is a like a bank of images, bank of artists
Hmm.
that you could buy different type of styles.
Okay.
So you prompt an idea, you prompt an image or a video or a copy, and it will give you a particular image in a particular style by an artist. So my role was there to connect with different artists, A level, like really famous people, and then mid level and then entry level artists, and present the product, get them into the platform, and start to learn. Both the artists, which are a little bit skeptic about joining AI in some cases, and then from the platform side, understand how can the product be uh, a better service and how we can curate, or there's all sort of IP things that need to be figured out, and styling, and it's been very very interesting uh, to to learn from both sides and
Hmm.
to understand the extent of the use and how the tool can be improved and how far you can go.
Right.
And it's quite amazing.
Yeah, it is. It
It's
really
quite
is.
amazing. And I was lucky enough to work at Google, for a period of time.
Hmm.
And I also learned a lot of, about, artificial intelligence and digital, which is totally different from, when you work in advertising or an agency, you think you know about digital, but
Oh yeah. Yeah.
when you work in a tech company,
You know
nothing,
nothing. You know
nothing.
nothing. Absolutely,
Um, so, yeah, I'm
man.
all about the future, um, as long as, it's not a Terminator
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, man, it amazes me that we've been friends this long and we've never like sat down and had like that detailed of a conversation, but I've learned so much more about you. Uh, and thank you for like being so generous with your time in doing that. But I do want to ask you like one last question that I know for a fact, that I don't ask people enough, and I'm not sure the last time I answered it either. But how are you? Like not work, but you, like the human being. How are you doing?
I'm great. Um,
Happy?
I'm happy. Happy is
Uh huh.
it's a funny word. You're never happy for a long time.
Yeah, it's momentary.
It's like happy moments.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I'm running through my mind, through my like things that made me happy and something that are happening to me right now. Yes, I mean, I can't complain. It's a it's a fun ride.
It is. It is. Well, man, thank you again so much. I
Thank
appreciate
you,
it.
thank
It's
you.
been great.
I'm happy to be here. Happy to share.